Hello and welcome to Heyman Nature. This is another crossover episode with the great Bob Murphy, and we have a barn burner for you today. Bob and I talk about the H1B visa controversy that erupted on Twitter recently, with, for the most part, Elon Musk on one side and Vivek Ramaswamy with him. And on the other side is a bunch of MAGA types, along with some libertarian types, having a very uh, high emotion discussion with a lot of different concepts being thrown around and a lot of insults thrown around, a lot of crazy arguments, some good arguments. And Bob and I dive into all of it in this a little bit longer crossover episode of Heyman Nature with the great Bob Murphy. Please enjoy.
Heyman Nature, a journey in search of a peaceful and prosperous society with human nature as a guide. Led by your host, Adam Heyman.
Hey there, Bob.
Hey, Adam.
Well, good sir, what is on your mind this week?
Well, as usual, you can just ask me what fight did I get in recently on Twitter.
You have been spatting on Twitter, haven't you?
Yeah, I actually had to impose a 3-day hiatus on myself to make sure I didn't completely ruin my career. But yes, and the controversy is the H1B visa stuff, and in particular, the MAGA folks' response to Vivek Ramaswamy's tweet on the subject and all of that. That's kind of what I think we should talk about. Lots here.
I think we should too. As I understand the situation, on one side basically is Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, and on the other side is sort of MAGA writ large. But if I saw correctly from my perch far away from X with my binoculars, just watching the melee, it seemed like it really got hot when Vivek attacked American culture with a spicy tweet. It's kind of long, but I figured I'd just read it out so everyone kind of can get the flavor.
Yeah. Maybe before, just to give a little more context in case some people have no idea what we're talking about, or if people revisit this years down the road. Right. So, the big picture here, folks. Remember, Elon and Vivek were big Trump supporters, and MAGA generally liked them. And then most of the MAGA people are happy about the whole Doge initiative, and Elon and Vivek are going to start slashing budgets or whatever. And I didn't hear a lot of people complaining about Vivek's background or anything 3 weeks ago. And then I don't know exactly what set this off, but I think Elon and or Vivek just said something about, we need to expand H1B visas in order to make sure that American tech companies can continue to be on top, or something like maintain our competitive edge in this global economy. And then they got a bunch of pushback about, what are you talking about? America first. No, we're not doing that. We're supposed to be hiring Americans and, not taking a backseat to foreigners. And then Vivek Ramaswamy, I guess, thinking he was going to help, like, hey, let's think more about this, and let's have some tough conversations here, folks, and issued this tweet that Adam's about to read. And that's when everything just blew up, and that's kind of what sucked me into this, because before that, I didn't really, know really what an H1B visa was, quite frankly. But it was, I'll let Adam read it first, but then as we go through this, that's why I got sucked into this and started fighting with the MAGA crowd it was their reaction to this tweet Adam's going to read that was bothering me. It wasn't so much I cared about the H1B visa thing per se.
No, I'm the same way. I had to look up what the definition was and how that differentiated from H2B and the mechanics of it all. I had no idea. So here's the tweet from Vivek. Oh, and I guess it also does matter for future listeners or aliens combing over the archaeological records of the human race. Elon Musk is a South African immigrant who was very wealthy, largely due to, tech employees. And Vivek Ramaswamy is first generation Indian descent, also quite wealthy. And so people reading this tweet are obviously going to be reading it, knowing who this person is and where he comes from and what he's all about.
But just to be clear, when you say first generation, he was born in Cincinnati. Vivek was.
I said first, but that's dumb. I meant second. I meant born here, but born in
Yeah,
America.
I wasn't saying you said something wrong. I'm just, but his parents, I believe, were not born in the United States, but Vivek Ramaswamy was born in Cincinnati.
Yeah, in my head, it was the first generation born here, but that's probably not. I probably used the word wrong, but yeah, that is what I meant. All right, so here is Mr. Vivek Ramaswamy addressing the issue of these visas. Quote, the reason top tech companies often hire foreign-born and first-generation engineers over Native Americans isn't because of an innate American IQ deficit, a lazy and wrong explanation. A key part of it comes down to the C word, culture. Tough questions demand tough answers, and if we're really serious about fixing the problem, we have to confront the truth in all caps, so you know he means it. Our American culture has venerated mediocrity over excellence for way too long, at least since the 90s and likely longer. That does not start in college, it starts young, again, all capitalized. A culture that celebrates the prom queen over the math Olympiad champ or the jock over the valedictorian will not produce the best engineers. A culture that venerates Corey from Boy Meets World, or Zach and Slater over Screech in Saved by the Bell, or Stefan over Steve Urkel in Family Matters will not produce the best engineers. Fact, I know multiple sets of immigrant parents in the 90s who actively limited how much their kids could watch those TV shows precisely because they promoted mediocrity. And their kids went on to become wildly successful STEM graduates. More movies like Whiplash, fewer reruns of Friends, more math tutoring, fewer sleepovers, more weekend science competitions, fewer Saturday morning cartoons. More books, less TV, more creating, less chilling. More extracurriculars, less hanging out at the mall. Most normal American parents look skeptically at those kinds of parents. More normal American kids view those kinds of kids with scorn. If you grow up aspiring to normalcy is what you will achieve. Now close your eyes and visualize which families you knew in the 90s or even now who raised their kids according to the one model versus the other. Be brutally honest. Normalcy doesn't cut it in a hyper-competitive global market for technical talent. And if we pretend like it does, we will have our asses handed to us by China. This can be our Sputnik moment. We've awakened from slumber before, and we can do it again. Trump's election hopefully marks the beginning of a new golden era in America, but only if our culture fully wakes up. A culture that once again prioritizes achievement over normalcy, excellence over mediocrity, nerdiness over conformity, hard work over laziness. That's the work we have cut out for us, rather than wallowing in victimhood and just wishing or legislating alternative hiring practices into existence. I'm confident we can do it. Close quote. So that set off a firestorm. Hard to believe.
Yes. So do you want to take a shot at this, or you want me to start ranting, or what do you want?
Heck no, I need a drink of water. You go over. You gotta heck.
Outsource this podcast to a call center.
Let me read Vivek Ramaswamy's tweet.
So again, I jotted. By the way, folks, let me just mention, if you can see that I'm glancing at my phone, it's just because that's where I jotted my notes over the last few days when Adam and I had decided this is what we're going to cover. So I'm not like texting and podcasting at the same time. Okay, first of all, the thing that absolutely floored me was people responding to this, not primarily by saying, sure, Vivek, all that may be true, but that's not really, your diagnosis of what's causing this issue is wrong. That no, the reason Americans aren't getting the judges is because blah, blah, blah. Yeah, there's problems with the culture and whatever. We all know TV sucks and, American kids hang out, and we've been complaining for decades about how we can't stand generation, whatever the next generation is, that's the new worst generation ever. And I can't believe how entitled these spoiled brats are. They're so lazy, blah, 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 right? That's not what they did. Instead, they were, you're criticizing American. No, American culture is awesome. Who are you, poop man? Do you know in India they poop in the streets? Are you kidding me? How dare you criticize our... And that's what made me just go nuts. Because especially like right-wing MAGA Americans. I mean, if Andrew Tate had said, I look at American TV shows, and without fail, every sitcom makes the dad an absolute buffoon, and it's always his wife who's much smarter and more of a moral person, and this is just feminism, and it's those people who control American media that are doing that on purpose to wreck American males. I don't think everybody would have flipped out and said, "How dare you criticize our TV shows?" They would have said, "High five." Okay, and so that's what just made me flip out about this, was that the people who 2 weeks ago were, talking about when is Jesus coming back, because this is end times, how awful and decadent our culture is. Now, how dare you criticize our culture? No, our culture is awesome. Screw you, Vivek, you foreigner who was born in Cincinnati, right? So that was, for people who were kind of surprised. And the reason I'm stressing this is on Twitter, a lot of people were saying things to me along the lines of, like, Bob, why you have this bee in your bonnet? What's going on? I don't even understand. And I'm saying that's what it was. And again, it's not, I mean, to give one example, that, or is it Oron McIntyre or something like that? Am I saying his name right?
I think so, yeah.
I've seen, like, I think Tom Woods has had him on his show. And so
Yeah.
in that context, I listened to him. I think he's an interesting guy. But on this thing, his takes were just making my jaw drop. And then at one point, when I think he was going at it with Dave Smith or something, and Dave was kind of defending and saying, like, what I don't understand what Vivek, and I don't remember his exact words, but it was along the lines of, well, the tone that Vivek used, he wasn't listening to our concerns. And it was like, are you talking, Trump people are now saying, yeah, he may have been right or wrong, but it was just, the way he said it to us really hurt our feelings. And by the way, Eric Weinstein recently tweeted, and he's like jumping in on this and challenging Vivek, and he referenced the tweet you just read, Adam, and said, "This hurt a lot of people, Vivek. I'm challenging you again to come talk about this." So, if this is what Kamala said, or, the head of, I don't know what, the Bedwetters Association, okay, but this is how MAGA's responding? And that's why I couldn't believe it. Again, these are people who complain about, like, participation trophies and, all these blue-haired entitled brats at the college campuses. Now, all of a sudden, these entitled brats who want to get their student loans forgiven when they spend 4 years studying complete crap in Marxism, now all of a sudden, they would all be IT geniuses were it not for H1B visas. So pick. Which one is it, guys? Okay, I've got that out of my system, and now I can go back to being an economist. By the way, with all some... I understand the more, I was reading some of the things, like, I think I'm going to have a fairly nuanced view on this. I'm not necessarily in favor of the H1B program, and we'll get into that. I'm just saying, though, that was my visceral initial reaction, and all the sarcasm that was flowing out of me was because I couldn't believe it was this group of people who were saying, hey, you should be more sensitive to our feelings when you go to criticize us. And, geez, can't you see how that made us feel when you said those things? So anyway, okay.
Yeah, I mean, before we get into the technical stuff and the immigration and the policy and the economics and all that, I think we need to dissect the emotions behind this conversation, because people hear, quote, American culture, and it's like I said to you earlier, it's like a Rorschach test. Everyone sees something different, and when they try and paint with too broad a brush. Like, I believe that Vivek is kind of right. There are aspects of American culture that have gone downhill in certain ways. Identitarian politics is certainly a part of it. Handing out participation trophies, I don't think that helped us largely. But even when we were at our culture was the healthiest, whenever you think that was, no matter what year we're talking about, there was still the broad masses of the public who listened to and watched cultural books, TVs, and movies that were just garbage, right? That's always been a thing. The excellent people are at the right end of the distribution tail, right? And most people are just sort of eating their Fruit Loops and watching Captain Kangaroo or whatever. It's just so weird that Vivek would just point to dumb TV shows for dumb people as if that was a new thing. And then it was also equally weird that these MAGA types or America Firsters would just get so upset at pointing out that, yeah, there's crap TV shows and whatnot. And yeah, I mean, I think on the margin, Vivek has a point. It has gotten worse, but it's always been the case that we've had dumb TV shows for a largely sort of dumb and not paying attention populace. That's not new.
Right. Just one more on that point, just to make sure I crystallize where I was coming from. My tweet on this that I thought distilled it down was it was like a fake dialogue, like it was a play. And I had Thomas Sowell, the black community needs to stop denigrating activities like studying as, quote, acting white. And then I had MAGA, hear, hear, with an exclamation point, like applauding. Yeah, Thomas Sowell, you got to tell the black community, they got to stop doing that. That's not helping them. That, when studying and showing up on time and listening to your boss at work, and that's just acting white. That's very destructive to their culture. Instead of blaming everybody else for their problems, they need to start at home and understand it's their own culture, right? And then I said the next thing, Vivek, Indian undergrads don't have keg parties. And then MAGA, we never trusted you. Okay. So a bit, but it was a joke, right? But I think there was some truth there, and lots of people got exactly what I meant. And so that's what I'm trying to isolate. It's not just in a vacuum, Vivek writes this and then some people get mad because they have a special tender place in their heart for AC Slater or something. No, it was the very people who in other contexts, hey man, facts don't care about your feelings. What do you need, a safe place, snowflake? Oh, the truth hurts, doesn't it? And stop blaming everybody else for why you can't succeed. All that goes out the window when it's your group. And so I'm just saying a lot of people who are not in this immediate exchange were like, yeah, we get that. All right. So, okay. So having said all that, yes, even though I thought the response to Vivek was crazy and way overblown, it was his particular critiques. I understood the spirit of what he was trying to say, but I think the punch didn't land. I mean, for one thing, Screech and Saved by the Bell wasn't really, it was, and I saw people arguing about this. By the way, my younger brother watched that show a lot, so I secondhand watched it. And I wouldn't have thought he was that smart. But some people were pointing out it was inconsistent. Like in some seasons he was building robots, and then in other ones, he was just kind of annoying. It wasn't like he wasn't like Mr. Spock or something. So, okay. And also in that show, AC Slater, I think was pretty a decent guy, whereas Zach was kind of a, preppy jerk sometimes or whatever, whereas, so anyway, I didn't think that was particularly holding up bad role models in that show. And, but having said that, I'll just say, and people can psychoanalyze this, oh, Bob, it's because you had your trauma that you say whatever you want, but people saying, no, Vivek, that's not true. That's not how that's certainly what I grew up, when I was in K through 8, the kids called me Bob the Brain. And if I would get a test back and have 100 on it, I would put my hand on it, to not let other kids see what I got, because I didn't feel
really?
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, it was not until undergrad when I finally was not worried about letting kids know how smart I was, right? So
really?
I actually, it was maybe in sophomore year, I got an A+ on an exam, and the kid in front of me turned around and started making fun of me. And some other cool guy, told that kid off, what are you talking, just because he got a good grade, screw you. And that kid, but yeah, well, I'm just saying that it's, I
don't know if I don't know if it's the year or the location, but I never had that problem. I was always acing every test. And
you beat me to the punch. I was going to say, well, that's because you never got 100 on the test.
No. I did quite well in school, and I never had any of those problems that you see portrayed in hack comedies,
right.
or
And let me just, try to beat people to the punch who want to go rip on me in the comments or something. I was basically this height and not this heavy in 8th grade. All right. So it's not like I was bullied or pushed it I actually, wasn't. I'm not saying
no, I'm talking
cool kids. But I'm just saying,
yeah,
it was, so I'm talking words, nobody physically did anything to me because, like I said, I was actually kind of big for my age and I actually was athletic. So it's not like I was physically bullied, but I, for sure, and I really think that did kind of screw me up. That's partly why I was all messed up. And then I had an epiphany in grad school when I realized partly what's going on here is I'm smarter than most of the professors I've had in my life. And that's making I wasn't connecting with people. And I realized partly is because I was so much smarter than most people. And, people can say, oh, Bob, you're messed up and ego. But no, it was the other way around, because I had trained myself to not think I was smart and to really hide that and just try to be normal and fit in. And I wasn't fitting in because I wasn't like everybody else in that respect. It was just not working. And anyway, I had to kind of realize that, and then things got better. So Don't get me wrong, I'm
Well,
still socially awkward, but I'm just better than I was, as a sophomore in high school.
I mean, these are just 2 data points, anecdotal, but it is interesting. Maybe I just got lucky all through school, and I did bounce around to a number of different schools in different cities and states, and I just never had a culture where the smart people were looked down upon or something. That just wasn't a thing. Um, you mentioned this tweet of Vivek's and it not existing in a vacuum, which is why I mentioned, where he was born and the fact that he's rich. And I should also point out that the way that tweet was received by MAGA and the rest of these people, you got to take it into account that they're talking about this immigration program, the H1B, whatever it is, visa. And we've been living through a weird time in America where it certainly seems like NGOs and other elites with political and economic interests are warping the natural immigration patterns to bring far more people into this country than seems like it would be happening organically. And, I'm sure there's a whole lot of resentment felt out there, especially given that we've had, some DEI and therefore sexism and racism in hiring practices and educational admittance qualifications. I mean, I think it's not crazy for a certain segment of the population, straight white males, to feel quite a bit put upon. And then to have these highly successful immigrants say, yeah, and you guys are dumb too, and your culture sucks. And that's why we need to import a whole bunch more Indians and Southeast Asians, because you guys are just so stupid and useless. And I can see why that would piss people off.
I can now, but I just want to stress Vivek did not say what you just said.
I know.
So I get it, but I'm just saying, anyway, the same people that, Trump said grab him by the, what? Come on, it's locker room time. Again, it's just Donald Trump fans are getting upset that, he should have just been more ginger when he walked on this, walking on eggshells. Because again, if Vivek wasn't saying no more sleepovers, no more TV, he just said less of that and more of, you know what I mean?
Right.
He was talking about tweaking things on the margin. And so I was saying, in a vacuum, if Ron Paul came out and said a lot of that stuff, I don't think anybody would have batted an eye. They said, yeah, I know American culture is ridiculous. Or, the more non-PC of them would have said, right, the people who control the media, that's why they're doing this to us on purpose, right? So that's what I'm saying, that you could have taken Vivek's thing and just reacted and just said, yeah, you're right, that these TV shows are bad, and who controls it? These bad people over here, and it's not our fault, and that's why not only do we not need more immigration, we don't need these people running the media. You know what I mean? Like, that would have made more sense in terms of their worldview, not to say, what are you talking about? Saved by the Bell is awesome. So anyway, for what that's worth.
Well, I mean, I bring the point up because not only is it true that we all have a little bit of hypocrisy in our pocket, but, we react to things emotionally and come up with the reasons why later.
Yeah.
Right? You see that obviously on social media when people get angry, and then 2 seconds later, the response is out there, and it might not be as cerebral as and well thought out as you might have hoped.
And just another, again, I understand there's a danger here. If I'm saying all this, people are going to psychoanalyze me and go, oh, no. But when I say something that's a bit esoteric on Twitter, someone will post a GIF of Austin Powers going, nerd alert. Okay. So I'm not saying that dissuades me from doing it, but I am saying we still have a norm where if someone says something that's a bit above the normal intellectualism of the conversation, someone will make sure to let that person know that, hey, you sound kind of abnormally smart there. You might want to watch that because you don't sound like us. Okay. And I never grew up in an Indian family or whatever. I don't have a tiger mom who's Asian, but I'm just saying, when I go into a Chinese restaurant and the kid's, running the register, then going and doing his homework over here, I don't think his parents will say nerd alert if he starts talking about whatever, calculus or something. So, okay.
Yeah, I think
it doesn't mean that's wrong, but I'm just saying, I don't think Vivek is just grasping at straws and pointing at some imaginary thing.
No, I think he's pointing at something real. I just think, like all things, it's sort of on the margins. There's a sliding scale. It's always been the case that we've had doofuses and people who look down upon intellectualism, probably because they're not capable of it. we probably have more of it now than we did, I don't know, like 30 or 40 years ago or something. I definitely think that's true. And I think we should arrest it. I mean, I think it's good that Vivek pointed that out. It just, I thought it was sort of clumsy the way he applied it, sort of sloppy. I hate to be that guy, but I've never seen any of the 3 TV shows he quoted, so I can't even evaluate.
Right. It's funny because when people were then saying things like, okay, what would it mean to be an American? So, somebody was reacting to me, said something like, well, I'll tell you, Bob, it's because we don't need some foreigner coming in here and telling us what's wrong with our country when he wants our jobs and to give them to his buddies. And so I retweeted that and said something like, Vivek was born in Cincinnati if Wikipedia is to be believed. And so, some people, but a bunch of other people were like, they couldn't believe that was my response. And they were like, Bob, his last name is, they deliberately misspelled it, or, Bob, yeah, he sure looks American to me, but you know what I mean? Like someone with brown skin and clearly is not American, and so you're just thinking through what would it mean to be, and to me, an American is someone who, if you heard him speak, would have an American accent and knows who Kobe Bryant is and knows, who Monica is and, who did Ross want to date on Friends and blah, blah, and just a bunch of stuff like that. And who's, depending on what age you are, like who Madonna is or what was her big song or so, a lot of cultural literacy things. And that's what was funny. The Boy Meets World, I did watch Saved by the Bell. Again, secondhand smoke from my brother. I wouldn't have watched it myself, I promise. But yeah, the Boy Meets, when he's talking about Corey from Boy Meets World, that means nothing to me. I don't know who Corey, I know what that show was, but I never watched it. So it is funny that in that respect, I think possibly Vivek watched more TV than I did. And maybe that's why I have a PhD in economics and he doesn't. But.
And he doesn't. Of course, there's those hundreds of millions of dollars. So you do have a PhD, though.
I understand what those hundreds of millions of dollars are. Does he really understand what they are?
No, not deeply, not like you. All right. Well, before we move away from the culture and talk a little bit more about the stuff you learned in that PhD of yours, yeah, I just want to reemphasize the point that we've all, there's always trash culture. And I think it's a mistake to paint with too broad a brush. But I also totally agree that culture matters, and we need to regain our culture in a lot of different ways. We lost it when we stopped thinking that meritocracy is better than, whatever DEI represents. Some inclusive, where the workforce needs to be exactly analogous to the composition of the public, or something wrong has happened. And moving away from metrics that are, that correspond with actually creating things and making the bridges stand up and the planes not fall from the sky. Yeah, it is poisonous to a culture to move away from things that are, old style American values. And, to Vivek and Elon's credit, both, they really embody old school American values. That's probably why they're so incredibly successful. And it must be kind of weird coming here, either yourself from a foreign country or your parents did, and watching a culture that you admired enough to come, and try to thrive in, or your parents did, and watching other people that are native born just sort of wallow in trash culture and not particularly fight back. So yeah, it's culture does matter. I just want to make that point.
Yeah. So maybe this is again, so folks, Adam and I kind of talked before we hit record here, and we had a bunch of disparate thoughts and we're trying to jam them all in here. So this might be more of like a stream of consciousness episode, but maybe I can say at this point, we are going to get into it in a minute. I have some things to say about perverse government incentives, and yes, we will get into that. And I think there is a lot of truth behind some of the claims I saw in terms of why, something's rotten with this system. I get it. And we can talk about that in a minute, but I do want to say, even though we're going to get into that, I don't want to completely skip over though this issue that, for example, my son, there was a period where he was on like the math, I don't know if it was the math club or something like that, when he was, I don't know, it was like 6th or 7th grade, something like that. And So, and they they went to some event at the magnet schools or something in Houston. And I went there, and in that room with all these other kids, it was 85% Asian kids that, from the other schools and whatever. Like, so my son's school, that wasn't what their composition looked like. My son looks like me, but I'm just saying in terms of who showed up, and it was clear, like the other teams all knew each other and stuff. Whereas my son's school, I think that was the first year they had sent a team to this event. Right. And so I don't, and these are all, again, kids are in 7th grade or whatever. I don't think that was because they were all brought over on some visa, maybe their parents were or whatever, and that's why they were in the country. But I'm just saying, I'm thinking probably the reason those kids were there is in the Houston area, which is where we were at the time. The kids that were really good at math and wanted to spend after school getting ready for this tournament, and then on a Saturday going to this and doing math problems all day. It was disproportionate to the number of Asian people in that region. And I think that was largely because those kids were better at math. And, we can go through why is that. And I would think, I don't think it's about the DNA or something. I think it's mostly because in their household, the parents expected them to be really good students, and it wasn't weird for the kid to be on the math team and studying after school to get ready for the math event. Whereas a lot of the other kids in that, a 10-mile radius of where that place was, that's not the way they wanted to spend their weekend. So if you want to say that's terrible, when I was in, I don't want our 7th graders doing that. Okay, that's fine. I'm not saying what's right or wrong, but just like in any kind of normal area, when there's a disproportionate outcome, if there's more men who are coal miners than women, and the women complain, and Jordan Peterson's going to come out and explain why that is, and it's not going to be because there's institutional sexism, right? And so if all these things, if there's a disproportionate number of Asians and Indians in the tech sector, this is the one area where the MAGA people now, no, it is institutional bigotry. You know what I mean? So that's all I'm saying is, you can imagine any kind of argument else. Well, okay, well then how come you don't start a tech company and hire all the Americans who you're saying are just as qualified, and you'll crush all these people, right? And because there's stories going around, like Ashley St. Clair did a thing about, I just got off the phone with this lawyer from California, and she said there's these shops that bring in these immigrants on the H1B program. They fake their resume. They put all kinds of bogus credentials in there. They coach them on how to do the interview, and then it's other Indians at these tech firms that hire them, and it's this huge scam. And it's okay. So why don't you start your company and just staff it up with Americans who are all stuck at Best Buy right now because of this craziness, and you'll crush them. You know what I mean? Like, that's what I'm saying, is some of these things, it's just that there's got to be more going on than just that. Or, again, these Indians they just hire other Indians. Okay, but if if a woman says, these companies right now are just old white men, they don't think women can do the job, we would trot out Jordan Peterson to explain why. No, that's not what's going on here. It's because of blah, 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 blah. You know what I mean? And then the women say, are you saying that we're lazy and we're not good workers? Right? And we laugh at that. No, that's not what we're saying. Check your feelings at the door, lady. Come on. This is just hard, cold facts, right? But anyway, I think I've beaten that horse to death.
No, I get your point. It's a good one. And there's definitely a certain sense where racism and nationalism tends to kind of break people's brains. Or ordinarily, as you were saying, they'd see a good point and they'd make that good point. But maybe when it cuts against, how they view themselves racially and who they think they are as a person, what their nationality is, it makes people think a little. And again, it's not like we've been living in a level playing field in a free market in regards to immigration and hiring policies and who's allowed into MIT. They've been racially profiling and letting more people in who are a certain color and sex and demographic group. And I don't blame people for being pissed off about that, even if I think they're misplacing their feelings and their response to that.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like everything's been fine and fair and I'm complaining over nothing because I don't like the results. The government and other institutions have had their thumb on the scale against people who look like me, and it's not stupid to be pissed off about that. And I don't blame people for even looking at the wrong culprit. Things are messy if you don't study political philosophy and economics, and you can confuse the company as being the villain when it's really more of a government thing or a fascist thing where the companies and the corporations are doing it together along with the universities. So I get why people have their dander up. One last culture thing before we move on. I do believe that this was a tripwire that could easily have come up naturally, but I can't help being suspicious when Elon and Vivek are poised to use Doge to, cut back on. They say they're going to remove $2 trillion of government spending and make everything efficient and cut back a bunch of these fiefdoms. I can't help thinking that it so helps the interests of people who are against Doge. Maybe they're fanning the flames here, or maybe this dispute really isn't as organic as it seems like. I don't know. I'm suspicious.
I mean, I understand what you're talking about there. And, I spent a bit of time, considering it. But at least for me, like the people I was responding to directly and retweeting and, like I know who they are.
Yeah, I know.
And, like I know Ashley St. Clair. I mean, I don't, I'm not like her buddy. I don't think she follows me on Twitter. But I'm just saying I've been following her for a while. I don't think she's getting paid by whoever.
I don't either.
The deep state. And Oren, Oren's not. I think that was sincere.
I don't either.
And then people argue with me saying, Bob, I don't understand why you and Tom are being so obtuse on that. Like, no, that guy knows who I am, and that's why he's pissed at me. So,
no, I
get it.
That's where I came down to.
Yeah.
Again, I think it's an organic tripwire, and it was going to get tripped over at some point or another. I was just suspicious.
Let me say one last thing on the culture. So one of the things I saw people saying was, okay, Vivek, well, as crappy as our culture is, how come it's all the Asians and how come they all want to come here to work and we're not all trying to get into their country? And I think that's right. And to me, the way I would explain that is the U.S. has the best institutions in the world.
And capital.
Yes.
That's the most capital, right?
And, but I say like the reason they have the most capital is because they had the best institutions. And then you can push it back one step and say, okay, well, why do they have the best institutions? And I do think that's a cultural attitude. And so it's going to seem like I'm going off on an irrelevant tangent, but I'm making a point here. Maybe you won't think it's a good point, but I was a big fan of Richard Feynman, an American, by the way. And he one time went down to it was in South America. Maybe it was Brazil, but I'm not confident of that. And they had him come down and give some lectures. And, he was working with the student, the physics PhD students or whatever the program was down there for a bit. And then he gave like a report or presentation to like the king or something, or the prime minister, whatever. It's like the government official. Again, the details are vague, but the spirit of this is definitely correct. And he said, I've very much enjoyed my stay here. Thank you for your warm hospitality in your country. The steakhouses are delicious. I'm making up the detail. He's very gracious in the beginning. But then he said something like, I have to tell you, though, I'm concerned about your science program, and I think I would be doing you a disservice if I didn't mention this. And so let me just tell it to you straight that, I'm a straight shooter. That's my reputation. I'm going to tell you. And he said, of all the students I worked with, there was really only one that I thought really had potential. And when I talked to him more, I realized he didn't grow up here in your country. Like, he came from somewhere else. And what Feynman was getting at was that the other students that he didn't think very much of, they were all very smart and they could, they memorized what was in the textbooks and whatever, but that's all they did is they weren't original thinkers. Yeah. And they just were, boom. Whereas the one kid that he thought had potential, again, came from a different place and where they weren't as conform. And so, I kind of filed that away with my own biases and whatever, like, oh yeah, the United States, like, yeah, we might not have in general the best math students or whatever, but when we have the rare genius that comes along, our culture and institutions allow him to just thrive. And just like, we have a Henry Ford come along and he can go start a company, we Thomas Edison and Richard Feynman, whatever. And that's why all the 0.001% of the top come to the U.S. because that's where you're going to be unfettered, relative to the rest of the world. It's not anarcho-capitalism. And succeed. And so even though the average American is, fat and dumb and blah, 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 but the rare ones who really are geniuses, where do you want to be a genius and grow up in the United States, right? So that's kind of my, that general thing going into this. And so I think all Vivek really is talking about is, okay, but why in general is it that, I mean, we make jokes about Americans can't find other countries on a map and stuff like that. I mean, that's not wrong. That's true, right? Americans in general are not very educated. That's what I'm saying is so crazy with the MAGA people flipping out about this is like, my joke, have you guys gone through a drive-through lately and tried to get change? I mean, they're not bad kids. There's a lot of stuff they don't know.
That's very true. The only pushback I'll give on that point is that in the same way that a whole bunch of really smart New Yorkers can't find Missouri on a map, I think the reason a lot of Americans can't find Kazakhstan on a map is because, who cares?
I mean, that's true. And by the way, my geography is awful, so I'm just picking that as an example. Yes, you're right. There is partly that, but
I do want to underscore your other broader point, though. I've always thought American culture, the way I picture it in my head, is that on the distribution of character traits and excellence and whatever, I thought we've had the longest and thinnest tails. We've got the most absolute geniuses and the most absolute doofuses, but there's something about the dynamism of an American culture that allows people to express their potential to the greatest extremes.
And by the way, just to make sure I'm not losing, I'm not trying to say for my story to work there, I'm not merely saying, the Feynmans and Henry Fords and whatever are carrying the rest of the slobs. No. The slobs have to believe in the American system. You know what I mean? Like they have to not like communism. They have to say, no, in America, there's private property. And if you start a business and you become a millionaire, good for you. And that's partly, it's like Deidre McCloskey's written a lot on this stuff in terms of why did the West grow rich and whatever, and people push it to institutions, but then that just pushes the problem back. Okay, why did the West have better institutions than whatever, the Chinese invented gunpowder first, blah, blah, blah. And, it partly comes down to, or at least the argument is, and I find it compelling, that, in the West, like parents, if their young son grows up to be a merchant, they were proud of him. Whereas in other cultures, it was like, you're going to be a crass merchant. Why don't you want to go work for the state and become a government official? Like that's a really thing that would make us proud. And so that matters. If in your culture, being a successful entrepreneur, I think, a lot of Americans think like working for yourself. That's awesome. If you could just work for yourself, if you could work for yourself and make $50,000 a year, a lot of people think that would be better than working, as a paper pusher for some boss you can't stand and making $60,000 a year.
Yeah, I'm one of them. Yeah. I appreciate that more. Absolutely.
So I'm just saying that all goes together. And so I think that, the elements, and so that answers the question. Okay, why is it, Vivek, that, the good math students are moving here and not vice versa? And that's why. And so it's that element of American culture that is good, that it, say what you will about the whole package, but it does allow for, we hold up the individual. Like that's our movies and whatever is typically, the rare individual who comes up, and he's a leader and he might, bring people behind him, but that's the kind of movies we like. It's not when the community responds to a crisis. It's when, this summer, one man can make a difference. And there you go.
The hero in 12 Angry Men wasn't the 11, it was the one.
Right.
It was the one who thought differently and convinced the rest of them. So talk to me about these ridiculous visas and what should be done. What's the state of things now and what should be done?
Okay, so the reason I understand, I was researching, and people thought I was just being coy when I on Twitter, when there were more and more people were getting mad at me, like, Bob, how come you're just and I kept saying, I'm not taking a stand, I'm doing research, and I was right. So people saying this is a scam, what they mean is it's even billed. Let me see if I can find it here. Do I have it? I don't know if I have it pulled up, but the government's own description of the H1B visa program says that this is designed to allow, U.S. companies to bring in foreign workers who have particular skills that, are not available in the general population, something like that might be the exact word, but that's the designation of the program. That's its ostensible function. And so then when the critics of that say, no, there's plenty of there's plenty of Americans that can do those jobs. And so we don't need to be bringing these people in. And it's not, the analog is not some brain surgeon, the best brain surgeon in the world, and we want to recruit him to come here to the United States. That's not what this is. These are relatively low pay, median, middle income jobs. And that's what we're talking about here. It's not that these people are all in possession of some rare skill that no U.S. worker
there's
has.
a bait and switch. It's been described as, no, these are only to bring in the top 1/10 of 1%. And that's clearly not true when you actually look at the entirety of the program, right?
Right. So I'll give the benefit of the doubt to Elon that, he tweeted out when people started flipping out about this stuff. I said, hey, I just want to be clear. Like you said, Adam, I'm talking about recruiting the elite 0.01% to fill these things to make sure that the U.S. maintains, the cutting edge of the tech sector. Otherwise, we're going to lose to, China or whoever. Okay. And so he might mean that, in other words, it is possible that, in his mind, there's like 1,500 slots a year that we need to fill. And if we don't get those people here and they go somewhere else, within 10 years, we're not going to be the center of the universe on this stuff. That could be a true statement. And also it could be, by the way, there's 85,000 of these things in this program that are issued each year. And so it could be that 70,000 of them really are it's not, elite or whatever, but the top few really are. Like, so I'm saying it's possible both sides are seeing true things about, their motivations or what they're pointing out. Is it maybe at this point, well, I'll go over, I know you said you saw some criticism, so I'll let you say whatever criticism you saw, but there was one guy, we'll link to all this stuff, folks, that he went through the numbers. So all this, the database of this is posted. And by the way, let me caution you, apparently, if you go into the database, you can see the applications that might have been rejected. All right. So there were some screenshots floating around of Chippendales dancers and stuff that, just because it was there doesn't mean the government gave an H1B visa for that job. Right. And so this guy claims, though, that he was aware of that and that, his figures, he was only looking at, approved applications or whatever. So the average salary was $120,000. 17% were under 75,000. Another 43% were between 75 and 125K. 15% were 125 to 150. 25% were above 150, and then 2.5% were 250K and above. Okay, so it's not all multimillionaire, but also it's not people making $50,000 a year. Again, folks, we'll link to that tweet. And this guy had a whole tweet thread about data that he got crunching the numbers from that are available at the Department of Labor's website on this stuff. Did you had written back to me, Adam, when I said that to you, saying you saw some criticism? I don't know if you want to say that.
Yeah,
now.
I just went looking for it, and I can't find it. So, I mean, the guy was making some technical complaint about the methodology or something, but I couldn't validate it, and now I can't even find it. So it was only one guy. Yeah.
Yeah. So there was another thing too, where one line of attack by which some guys who were claiming that they were knowledgeable, saying that, hey, I work in tech and I'm an immigrant, I'm very familiar with immigration law, blah, blah, blah. And because what was happening is people were assembling screenshots and tweet threads of ludicrous jobs. Like I said, Chippendales dancers, someone working at a restaurant, things like, and making $20,000 a year, because with these job applications, the salaries are listed as well. People teaching English, at some charter school or something, and saying, oh yes, we can't find any Americans who can speak English, that kind of, so critics were just railing against this, government abuse, and look at how this thing that's ostensibly for the elite of the elite is being used just to fill, all these, it's just like a backdoor immigration, cheap labor thing. So one pushback I saw against those were people saying, no, you have to pay at least $60,000 to qualify for an H1B visa. I think that's a little bit off, but I think the spirit's probably right. I believe that the actual rule is you have to pay the prevailing wage or better, or if you already have American workers doing comparable jobs in your company, if you're bringing in foreigners on the H1B, you got to pay them the same thing you're paying the Americans, or the prevailing wage, which is based on like local union rates. All right. So there's that. And then I think, though, there's a separate thing that's like an exemption from those general rules saying you don't have to, what do you call that? You have to do attestation. So I think when you submit that, if you want to say, oh, yeah, I'm bringing in this guy and the local union wage rates are such and such, or we have Americans that are doing the job right now for X dollars a year, and we want to bring in these guys from India and give an H1B, and we're going to also pay them, and I have to attest this, blah, 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 and you got to sign something official. I think if you want to circumvent that, you got to just pay them a floor of $60,000. I think that's what the confusion on this was. Is, in other words, I think in theory, if the prevailing union wage rates were less than $60,000, I believe you could bring in somebody and just show I'm paying the local union wage rate, even if it were $55,000. So anyway, just to clarify for people, if you're wading into this and seeing contradictory claims, I think what I just said is correct. But that kind of dovetails with the numbers I just showed you there. That guy, when he went and crunched the numbers, was saying that he thought, under his thing, only 17% were 75K or below. So even if it is true that there were some, squirrely things about whatever, an English tutor getting $30,000 a year, that's clearly not the bulk of this program, if that guy's numbers are correct.
So, I don't want to jump the gun. I want to ask you a question along the lines of what should be done, but I don't know if we're there yet.
I don't think we're there yet. So this issue of, okay, and this to me was the heart of it, where I was really trying to pull out of people, like, what's your issue with this? And here again, Stefan Kinsella actually tweeted something today that
I saw that
reassured me that, okay, my instincts are right. And I was actually surprised. Apparently he's close to an open borders guy. I didn't think he was. I guess years ago I had seen him write a critique of like Brian Kaplan's open borders, and I think Stefan didn't just like the argument Kaplan made, and right. Stefan was doing it, so okay, fine. But anyway, he was saying something like, I'm really surprised in this. It seems like a lot of these people don't understand standard like free trade arguments and things, and I'm just like, you shouldn't be against this because it's going to lower American wages. That's a stupid argument. If you want to say, I don't want foreigners moving in here and living down the street for me, okay, but that's a separate thing. And to me, that's the crux of it. And that's what I was trying to get from people, that, for example, there were some people claiming there are Americans right now. Like, I know a guy, he's got a master's in computer science, and he's working at Best Buy stocking shelves because, there's guys working. And so I was pushing, saying, wait a minute, are you saying he would be happy to work for the wage they're paying the people, paying these Indians at the tech companies, and they just won't hire him, that they'd rather pay more to an Indian than pay less to him as an American? And they weren't necessarily answering that, but some, I think, were basically yes, because, these Indians are racist and they don't like white guys, that kind of stuff. So again, if that's the argument, I don't think that's going to stand up to scrutiny if you're saying you could pay American white guys less money to do comparable or a better job. I don't think that holds up. What I do think makes sense, and people were saying, is no, the foreigners coming in work for lower wages than what you'd have to pay to get Americans working there. That makes sense to me. And there I would just say, okay, but if that is the extent of your argument, and saying, okay, so my concern with this is it's lowering U.S. wages, that's just economically equivalent to the free trade debate, mm-hmm. which, there could be some, there are a lot of MAGA people who are against free trade. And so they're being consistent, right. But I'm talking about like libertarians getting mad at me. I want to say, no, I'm just, this is consistent. Like, that's a bad argument. So again, just to be clear, I know I might be losing people. I'm just saying, if you understand why letting in cheap TVs from India, even though that might make it impossible for Americans to be in the TV manufacturing business, and the reason is, well, because for an American to do that, we'd have to pay him $6 an hour, and no American's going to do that. He could do something else. That logic, it's better to bring it in. Yeah, the Americans can't do that. They got to go do something else. But now all the Americans benefit from having cheap TVs, right? Like that's the argument just in terms of the wage distribution, whatever. And so likewise, if you're just looking at the economics of it, somebody coming in and allowing tech companies to get labor at a lower price, that might hurt certain Americans, but then it lowers the price, of the tech output. Whatever.
Yeah.
If you like whatever it is they're making, then that's the argument there. So again, that by itself is not decisive, because again, there's a whole you can be a libertarian and be against open borders, because it's they're not just worker. Put it to you this way: if the tech companies could just have Zoom calls with the guys and they stayed in India and they just said, no, we're just going to outsource this and have these guys as consultants instead of hiring the local white guy working at Best Buy, in Phoenix, we're going to instead just have Zoom calls and give the job to some guy who lives in Mumbai, then that's just a pure economic thing. And I'm saying if you understand the basic case for free trade, that would apply there too.
Yeah.
And so, that again, I'm not going to litigate that here, but I'm just saying if you understand the case for free trade, then that's there. Whereas it's different to say, no, the guy's going to come over, because then, that raises a whole bunch of property rights issues that, Dave Smith had on the Human Action podcast, and, people get into that. So that's all I'm saying. If you're against it because you're saying, no, in general, I want to limit immigration, and this is just another way to let more people come in, and how is that libertarian? That's fine, but I'm saying the people no, this is lowering U.S. wages. I'm saying that's not a good argument. That it's lowering U.S. wages, but it's also making goods cheaper for other Americans. So it's not like it's helping Indians and hurting Americans. No, it's helping those Indians, and it's hurting some Americans and enriching other Americans, not just the stockholders or something like that. That's, again, in general, I would hope right-wingers would understand that it's
what would
not
you say,
U.S. shareholders versus the world.
I get your point, and I totally agree with it. I'm just curious, how would you handle a follow-up question where somebody says, okay, yeah, I get it in that narrow sense. It's going to hurt some Americans and help others, primarily consumers. What would you say if they said, yeah, but what about the knock-on effects of the fact that, Americans aren't getting the advantages that just come from working and growing and expanding in a certain area of the economy? Like they're just being shut out for some reason and not getting a chance to learn the next new thing that you'd learn if you were in that industry. You know what I'm getting at?
I do, but even there, that's why I'm saying, to me, that the absolute numbers of these pay scales matters. That like to say, oh, we want to let in Mexican or Honduran immigrants to pick fruit and to be maids at the hotel because Americans won't do those jobs, and to say, but Americans, they would do it if you paid more. Like there, we're talking about the reason an American doesn't want to go pick fruit for whatever it is, $8 an hour, is because they could do something else that pays more. But here, if we're saying, the Americans need to be paid more than $100,000 a year to go work at tech and build their skills. Like at some point, it's like, well, if you don't want to go work for $100,000 a year and develop your human capital, I don't know what to tell you. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, so that's what I'm saying. The absolute value of these payments, I think, matters there. The other thing too, I want to say before I forget, is with this stuff too. It's again, I don't know enough about the tech sector and the global marketplace and all this stuff, but there is an argument. Like I could take what you just said and flip it on its head, and that's certainly what Elon and Vivek are claiming. Again, I don't know if what they're saying is accurate, and maybe they are just making a specious argument. Like any industry leader might, say to the government, we need this because otherwise disaster will strike, when they're exaggerating. But what they're saying is, it's not that, if we don't let these, whatever number is, 40,000 tech workers in a year, and again, the number is 85,000, but again, we've seen, you could start breaking that down, and not all of it's really, but let's say the number's like 20,000 really critical ones. And so what they're claiming is, I'm putting words in their mouth, but I think this is consistent with what they're warning, is saying if we shut that down and just year after year, there's 20,000 more, of some of the best people that, we could recruit to bring in, and, paying them 150 grand a year or whatever. But, these are quality people. And then we don't do that. And so they go somewhere else. They're going to say eventually the American tech companies are going to go out of business, right? It's not that will mean the U.S. will still dominate and now we'll have all these Americans doing those jobs instead for the rest of time. It's no American's going to be doing it then either, right? Because those companies will leave,
Right,
like they'll
right.
go to
They'll have failed. Yeah.
wherever. So if to the extent that's true, you could flip it and say, no, by doing it this way with a hybrid approach, the tech companies stay centered. The innovators in the global marketplace are based in the U.S., and then all the Americans who still work at those companies and benefit from being, in the mix. Yeah, maybe they're not all, maybe the top programmers are 60% Indian or something, but still, there's Americans in there benefiting from that. Right. So I'm just saying with this stuff, it depends on the specifics, and it's not if you shut that off, that means it's just all Americans now who get to lead the world. That's Elon and Vivek are saying that's not true. If we foolishly cut ourselves off from this talent, eventually we will just fall behind. Innovation will stop happening here. Now, again, maybe they're making that up. I don't know, but that certainly is possible.
So with the understanding that you don't know the details of all of this, I'm going to try and pin you down on an answer, or at least a guess of an answer.
Sorry, can I say one last thing?
Of course.
Please, on this, because there is a nuance here. And so I was talking to someone, I won't say his name because I don't know if he wants me to say his name. And he's, trained in Austrian economics, familiar with that. And he is familiar with the computer science programs in New York City and some of the colleges there and universities. And he was saying, yes, they are predominantly Asian, the students, particularly as you get up to the master's level. And, just going back and forth with me trying to understand the incentives, and it's largely because they're willing to pay more. And so those schools, they don't need to give out scholarships. They can just charge full tuition. So those departments make a bunch of money off of the masters in computer science, whereas, they don't make money on the PhD students. Right. So, and then just pushing there's an interesting nuance. And so it's, you on the margin, if you're a foreign student, you benefit more from buying, paying, I don't know what the tuition is, a bunch of money to get a degree from, an elite U.S. school, a master's degree in computer science or some related STEM field. If that then allows you to apply for an H1B and get that, because you making $150,000 a year in the U.S. on an H1B thing is so much better than your next best alternative if you stay home in your home country. And so for you to pay, whatever it is, $40,000 a year in tuition for 2 years to get some degree, that's totally worth it to you. Whereas for an American who has an aptitude and could go through and has the intellectual ability to go through a master's in computer science, it might not be worth it to you to go $80,000 into debt for that program, because your fallback is
that's fascinating.
Making $80,000 as a stockbroker.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
You see how that works?
I never thought about that.
Yeah, so I'm saying both sides. There's a little bit of truth. You know what I mean? So the people saying, no, we're advertising for these jobs, and I'm telling you, all the people with master's degrees and a willingness to work grueling hours, the overwhelming majority of them are foreign. What do you want me to do? They all have U.S. degrees. What do you want me to do? And you just chase, what
an ironic thing that
Yeah.
Americans would do less on these would do less better in these high caliber jobs, or be less well represented because we have better fallback options.
Yeah. So anyway, and I haven't thought through the full ramifications. Is that good from a free trade? But I'm just saying it's there is that interesting element there where to say Americans could do it. Well, they would need to go through these programs or whatever, and there's the opportunity cost, so there is this element to it as well. But it is also true that the raw supply each year of how many people are on the market applying to these tech jobs who have relevant degrees is disproportionate, to these other cultures, but that is not a pure market outcome. So, both sides can look at that and take from that what they will, but I just want to be honest with you and say, I did realize as I was pushing into this that there is an interesting and again, the schools running the program, they're not, they want to make the most money. So that these people are coming and they're paying us more, and, their students are certainly qualified, and our, a degree from us is very marketable. The employers know if you go through our computer science master's program, this guy can code, no doubt about that. Right. So anyway, it's just, you see each component in the overall system and how it all works, but there is something fishy about that.
Yeah, I get it. Fascinating. All right, well, let's get down to brass tacks. Given the following constraints, you don't know this high-tech industry that well, all the ins and outs, and you are a free trade economist guy, and you care about America and Americans, and you understand that we don't live in any kind of a free market paradise. The environment that we're operating in here is just flooded full of government regulations and restrictions and perverse incentives and all the rest of the things. If you could only have full control over the one thing, this H1, H2B visa program, would you abolish it or expand it or tweak it, and why? And I'm not going to hold you to this. It's second to the last day of 2024. I'm just curious what your knee-jerk or reasonably well thought out opinion is right now.
Okay, so what I don't like is this idea of people saying, hey, we don't need immigration. We need a moratorium. Just we got to just work this stuff out. We have enough workers at home. To me, when people make blanket statements like that, it sounds like the environmentalists saying, right, we don't need coal-fired power plants. We can just do it. Technologically speaking, we know that wind turbines work and, solar panels work. And so they're not realizing well, yeah, you could do it, but it would cost a lot more per kilowatt hour. And there's a lot, what I mean? So yes, all these positions currently staffed by Indian immigrants, there are Americans who could do it, but there would be opportunity cost, right? They're doing something else right now. And like I say, it's a lot of these, they're probably making more than $60,000 a year doing something else. So it's, you got to take that into account. And so rather than just trying to centrally plan things, to me, I would like to see a shift more towards like a Hoppian idea of an employer who wants to bring somebody in, as long as he posts, I'm making this up, but shows the government the contract or whatever, and then gives the government a $200,000 flat payment. And then if that person is convicted of a crime or something while here, the employer is somewhat on the hook for that up to some cap or whatever. And then, the person obviously gets immediately deported if they commit some serious crime while in the country. And to me, that's the way I would want to have it structured, is to switch it over to, a price-based thing as opposed to a quantity control. And, to me, that would make a lot more sense. Again, the first best thing is private property, and everyone can do whatever they want with their land. And, just like a store can let whoever they want in and whatever. But I'm saying, given that you're still going to have a U.S. government controlling the border and having migration policies, that, to me, that makes more sense, is to switch it to a price-based thing. And again, how do you pick the price? That's somewhat arbitrary, I grant you. And I would err on making the price high in the beginning. But to me, that would make more sense, because then you could fund the government.
I totally agree. I think it's Hoppe's idea, or maybe he was going off Rothbard. I'm not sure, but yes, something about having a sponsorship and then either posting a bond or some high level amount of dollars in order to cover all of the negative externalities that people who are skeptical about some of these immigrants that are coming in are worried about. That would do a whole lot of good to move it closer towards a total private property society, as far as what incentives are being faced by the actors in question. You wouldn't just have be able to put up your ad on international Craigslist or whatever, and then let people come in, and then if bad things happen and they show up and cost American taxpayers all this money and commit these crimes, call the cops. I don't know. What do you want me to tell you? It would be nice if those externalities were actually internalized in the form of a sponsorship, a guarantee, a bond, or something like that. I'd at least like to try it rather than the current bloated system.
Right, because it's and what really sparked this originally when I went down this rabbit hole was the Oren guy. He said something like, "Sorry, I'm just not buying it that there's all these STEM geniuses in these other countries who have all this productivity and potential, but they need to magically cross into the United States before they activate. And they could be doing so much for their home countries. And to me, that was just like such ignorance of economics.
Right.
And that's why I got so upset and I started, going off on this stuff. And so there I used the analogy and said, okay, well, suppose there's a kid in Cuba, this 19-year-old, and he can consistently throw 102 mile per hour fastball strikes, and scouts from the major leagues are coming down trying to get him to move to the U.S. And imagine if his dad said, well, no, because him magically crossing a border doesn't make him throw faster, so he's just as good at baseball down here in Cuba.
It's almost like there's something about being in the States with that 102 mile an hour fastball
Right.
that's worth more than being stuck in the Dominican Republic.
And so if you get that, then likewise, yes, people who have a really good ability to program and whatever, and they have a good work ethic, whatever, they are more productive. Their labor is worth more in the U.S. than it is in their home country. So that is the economic gain to having them come to the U.S. And so, yes, given that there's this surplus produced by them just physically moving and being able to work, with U.S. companies and the teams and whatever, and relying on the infrastructure and so forth, to me, it would make sense that, okay, the company, given that there's in a sense global, wealth just went up by $500,000 by this guy moving. Okay, the company maybe gives $200,000 to the U.S. government that we use to pay down the debt or something. You know what I mean? Like you could really, if you really want to do it, like it's a lump sum payment to all the U.S. taxpayers or something, because otherwise the U.S. government is going to spend it on something stupid.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like I'm just saying that I think if they did some program like that, that would somewhat more alleviate, the concern, but it would balance it if there really are these people. And like, no, it just makes so much economic sense. There's so much money on the table by them staying where they are. If they just came here, that, okay, well, why don't you just spread the wealth a little bit to let the U.S. citizens benefit from their great institutions?
It reminds me a little bit of Javier Milei in Argentina, assuming that he means what he says. I mean, it sounded like the possibility was that he was keeping some of these bad taxes that he knows are bad taxes in place, because that would generate a stream of revenue that he could use to pay down the debt held by I guess it's the central bank or whatever. And since we're just in such a hellscape of not a free market, you can easily imagine that you'd have to do some kind of creative, weird things to get from here to there that might look a little funky, like charging people, $200,000 if they want to import some labor from India that is going to increase their bottom line by $500,000 or something like that.
Can I ask you, Adam? Now there's something about this. If we could just, maybe this would be the last thing we do, unless you had something else on your list. But something I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but it's interesting to me that, and I listened to Dave Smith and Robbie the Fire when they went through this issue, and at the beginning they kind of stipulated that, yeah, we all agree, bringing the best baseball and football athlete, or sorry, baseball and basketball athletes from around the world to recruit them to come play in the U.S. Like, as me watching the TV, I want to see the best in the world, and that doesn't bother me. I'm not worried about, well, gee, that job could have gone to an American who maybe doesn't have as good a jump shot or something like that. People don't think like that. And I could see, all right, like, oh, there's some great French chef. And so, a New York restaurant brings him in, and he's the master chef or whatever. And just, he really is one of the top 15 in the world. And I think people would be okay with that. And so my question though is to you, like, number one, does that sound right to you? You think most people are okay? And they say, yeah, that's not what we mean when we talk about, restricting this stuff, and that's an abuse. If that's all the H1B did was stuff like that, we wouldn't care. That'd be fine. And then two, if that is, you do agree that that's most people's intuition, I want to say, well, but why, why doesn't it work that, isn't it unfair? I mean, what job is more American than being a baseball player? Why should some foreigner get to steal that job when there's a perfectly good base runner, who grew up in Cleveland that could do the job? And so I don't.
That's a fascinating question.
What I mean?
I never thought about it before, but my knee-jerk guess is that we all sort of understand we're not going to be able to hit that jumper like Kobe, so we're not getting pushed out. We just couldn't have made that. Couldn't have ever made the team, whether they were importing. Kobe's the wrong answer, but importing somebody from overseas. Whereas I think when it's just some unspecified labor position, I think more of us do just sort of think, oh, well, yeah, I could get trained up and do that job.
Okay,
They
yeah.
don't think that there's an impediment in their own natural ability to just being the best programmer in the entire world and system
Right.
builder. And
Okay,
I think it's got to be something like that.
okay, I think you're right, and that's the intuition. But then what's interesting to me is if you think about it, though, it's like, okay, well, who said though that as U.S. consumers we're entitled to see the best jump shot? You know what I mean? Like, aren't we being greedy? Aren't we sort of
right?
Being letting our desire for pure basketball utility outweigh our concern for our fellow Americans?
Great question.
And that's the thing that they're like. There was a political cartoon that I retweeted today where it has a dad. It's clearly in the context of this debate. It has a dad talking to his son, and then he's got like this little Russian boy off to the side.
I've seen it. Yeah.
And he said it's something like, "Sorry, son, but Vlad here is willing to be my son for half the allowance that I pay you, and he's more obedient." So it's really just the MAGA people, yeah, these idiot free trade types or whatever. And, so if that's the way you're thinking about it, okay, I get that. But then again, why is it okay that, no, I get to see the best basketball players on earth? Why isn't that unfair to the, so there's that element. And then also,
but there's an answer to that. I mean, that's why libertarianism is so great, right? It doesn't make any sense to try and answer the question, who has more of a right? The guy who wants to see the best jump shot, or the guy who thinks, who has a bigger right? The consumers or the wannabe employees? And that question can't be answered, which is why it's systems over goals. We implement a system of freedom, and then we let the chips fly where they may, because no one's rights supersede other people's rights. That's the whole point. We don't know how it's supposed to shake out.
But then, so then I, as an American, I want to watch the best people on basketball, and I want to buy a product from Silicon Valley at the lowest price. And the only way they can give it to me at the lowest price for the given qualities that it has is by bringing in foreign workers, because they're willing to do those tech jobs for $100K a year, whereas a comparable American could do it, but they would have to pay them $150K a year, and the price would cost more. So how come when I want that, I'm not allowed to do that, and I'm being a jerk? And don't you understand that's like, hiring a Russian kid to be your kid instead of your son?
You're not entitled to not be called a jerk, but you are entitled to not have someone else pull out a gun and stop you.
Okay, so
they want to use force to stop you from bringing the worker over.
Okay, so you're in favor of an infinite H1B program.
I mean, like I said, you confound the situation by having all these other laws on the books that are screwing everything up. But yeah, in general, I think that one person shouldn't be able to stop another person from hiring somebody, assuming you can internalize all the externalities. Yeah.
Okay, but sorry. So maybe I didn't know what your view was, and that was part of it. But do you understand what I'm saying? Like, I think if you go down that path, you might unwittingly blow up all your opposition to, and it just comes back to, well, the foreigners who we come to be a starting center for the Celtics aren't gonna, be a rapist or something. You know what I mean? Like, did you get? Are you seeing what I'm saying? That to me, it's you are saying yes, that I, as an American consumer, have this untrammeled ability to, if I want to see a basketball team with the best players on earth, the government should not restrict the Celtics and the Lakers from recruiting them, and they get to move here and live in the United States and play for those companies. And so I'm saying, if I, as a consumer, want a product, and the only as low price as possible for a given floor of characteristics and quality, and the only way the American company can give that to me is if they're allowed to bring in
some
Indian
Indian
workers.
Saying.
Okay,
what I'm saying is I want a completely and utterly free market. I don't want there to be a government. And if you're saying that the only way for you to get your cheap electronics is to import, a bunch of rapists and murderers, I'm saying no. That's the initiation of force. You're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to. Just because you want to buy a thing doesn't mean you're supposed to allow them to eat all the cats and eat all the dogs and rape all the neighbors, so to speak. You know what I'm saying? You're still not allowed to use force, even if it's a.
Oh, okay. So what you're saying is the Lakers wouldn't be able to recruit the best shooting guard on planet Earth if he ate cats.
Or if he could not stop himself from raping his neighbors.
Right.
There's going to be a problem there. Yeah.
Yeah. If the scouts are like, he does have a rape
But
problem.
he does have a great jump shot. Darn it. Have you seen the jump shot?
Yes.
how much do you actually even like those cats?
So, okay. So anyway, you get my point though, that it was interesting to me when people just kind of concede like, oh, of course. And the other thing too with the French chef is, okay, so you bring in the French chef, he's top 15 in the world. And so those meals at that New York City restaurant are going to be $500 a plate, or not a plate, but a meal. And so that's not helping blue collar Americans. Whereas if you brought in second tier French chefs who would be willing to move to Cincinnati and only make $250,000 a year working there, then maybe that would raise the quality of the cuisine in the area for people who like French food and actually help middle class America. And
are you of the opinion that in general, when capital and labor move to their most productive use case, that just in general that raises the opportunities even available for everyone else just because more wealth has been created? You know what I mean? Like, it's not like it's preventing the 250,000 a year chefs from doing something. They can, when you make a country or a city even, or a restaurant more valuable, I think that just creates more opportunity for everybody.
Right. So I think in general, what happens is if you let on the market, there's some brain surgeon in Germany, and if we let him move to Miami, I think that lowers brain surgeon salaries, certainly in the area and possibly even rippling out. And so in that sense, other brain surgeons in Miami are hurt by that, whereas people getting brain surgeries and they're shareholders of hospitals or whatever are made better off. Again, the healthcare is all regulated, it's all screwed up. But in general, that's, if you bring in a bunch of migrants who cut lawns into Miami, that slightly lowers the wages of all the people who right now are cutting lawns, and it helps all of the people who own lawns because now the price of lawn cutting services goes down. And so I think that's the way you analyze it. In general, the benefits to the winners outweighs the losses to the losers and these kind of things, if we're not worried about negative externalities, right? Because that's partly what happens. If you're allowed to come in and then, you have a bunch of kids who then go to public schools and whatever, and you use a bunch of programs, and so on net the taxpayers are subsidizing your family, then that slight economic gain you're bringing, could be swamped by that. And that's the kind of thing that a lot of the Rothbardian types,
it's because of all those policies, right? All those policies is why I understand why Dave Smith and others, and probably me, support having some restrictions on immigration, until we can get rid of all these horrible and perverse incentives that make negative externalities. Right. But if we could get rid of all of those, I do think that we get richer as a country. It's tough to aggregate all these things, but I do think we get richer allowing the free movement of peoples and goods and capital across borders that shouldn't even exist. It should be private property borders, not national borders.
So, yes, I think I agree with 100% what you said. But again, I just want to say, right, you're kind of flipping to, well, yeah, that's why I'm for, I'm an anarcho-capitalist. Right, but I'm saying, even given right now our system as it is, people who are against open borders and people who think the H1B visa program is being abused, I think even most of them agree, I'm okay with the NBA being able to recruit from planet Earth. And I think they would also agree, I'm all right with New York City restaurants bringing in some French chef who really is hands down, one of the 10 best in the world. And, and the other ones are, in Paris and wherever. And that's why, it will really, to open this restaurant, the food will be better than it would be if we hired somebody who's currently living in the U.S. And they're okay with that. And I'm saying what's interesting to me about that is if you allow that, then, they're displacing, the American-based, who might not look white, it might have been somebody else from, first generation French guy or something, but who's a U.S. citizen who otherwise would have been the head chef at that restaurant. But moreover, who's benefiting from that? It's only the people who are going to the restaurant primarily. I guess the average guy in Cleveland gets some thrill knowing that, oh yeah, New York has really good restaurants.
Well, that's a good point. He'll never go there. He'll never be the one who gets to eat that
so I'm
food.
Saying,
and yet we're still in favor of it.
Right. The guy, if you want to help blue collar America, it would be by letting in the second tier chefs from around the world who are willing to go to, flyover country, and that, instead of having an Applebee's, you've got, a French restaurant, and, hey, that's pretty good. Given that it's in Cleveland, that's not bad. Right. So you see why I'm saying that's kind of interesting to me?
It is interesting. It is. I guess.
I'm glad I stuck with that, because I could tell from before you weren't getting how good my point was. So I stuck with it.
It was slippery. I'm glad you stuck the landing.
Yeah, Abu would have gotten it on the first attempt.
I mean, thank God for the immigration restrictions, or you would be talking to Abu.
Yes.
All right. Well, we've gone a little long, but I think this was fascinating and well worth it. Is there anything else you wanted to? Any other point you wanted to make before we wrap?
I just want to get your take on. Again, I was just trying to think: is it true? And not that there's anything wrong with this. Like, again, I think there's a healthy balance. Like in the original Star Trek thing, Spock was smarter than Kirk.
Yeah.
But there was a reason Kirk was the captain.
A good reason.
You see what I mean? And it was kind of like Kirk was kind of just well balanced. And I think that's kind of like what the U.S. is. Like Americans in general, we're not the best engineers or something, but we're the best entrepreneurs. We're good at like founding companies and then recruiting, and let's get some Germans here to build the engines, and we'll get some Japanese guys to do the math, and we'll do. I'm generalizing, but you get the idea. So I think there's that element, and again, that kind of just underscores that what is it about U.S. culture? I think it's our reverence for entrepreneurship and commerce, and that we think there's nothing dirty about that, and individualism and so on. But anyway, what I wanted to ask you though was, I was trying to think, is it true that, Vivek's thing about they like the football captain over the math Olympiad or whatever? I think maybe one way you can see that is when you think of certain schools, a lot of Americans know, like, oh yeah, who's got a good football team this year or whatever. I don't think a lot of Americans know of Nobel laureates. What schools did they go to? Like, oh yeah, that school. You know how many Nobel chemists that thing has produced? Americans don't know that, but how many Heisman trophies came out of that program.
No,
so does that matter, or is it just more, well, that's people aren't watching chemistry, every Saturday, and so is that kind of a silly comparison?
I mean, as far as public perception, I don't know, but I do know that what makes for excellence, the thing that makes a person excellent along various disciplines and fields and endeavors, is a multifaceted thing, and IQ is only one small part of that. And what makes you the captain of a football team, even in entrepreneurship, might be more important than your raw IQ, which is why James T. Kirk was a better captain than Spock ever was. In the original series, Spock got to be the captain of a ship for a little while in one of the episodes, and it was a train wreck because he does not have command quality, and you need that to be a successful, well-rounded person. You probably should have a decent understanding of the arts. There's a reason why old school classical education was such a well-rounded endeavor, including athletics. Mm-hmm. And so, I don't think Americans are just dumb hicks by having some respect for a quote unquote jock, because leadership and interpersonal skills and being able to communicate, those things don't get measured on an IQ test, but they're incredibly important.
Well, and also too, as you're saying that, I'm realizing what would be really messed up is if our culture revered the guy who got cut from the football team and the girl who didn't win prom, the prom queen runner up. Then you'd say that's celebrating mediocrity. You know what I mean? So even there, those are meritocracies. It's just the thing that it's selecting for.
So what Bob Murphy is saying is we're going to fail as a country until we realize that the movie Rudy is all backwards.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, he's trying hard. Okay.
He tries so hard.
Yeah. Stupid Irish.
So stupid. Shame.
Great okay, stuff. but do you get what I'm saying? The issue of, so thank you. I mean, this is all good stuff. We're having a conversation here, folks. This isn't choreographed. But do you get what I'm saying about, does that matter? Does that mean anything in terms of, Vivek's got a point that
I think our culture would be better if it was more even. Like if we didn't revere the institution that only won or produced Heisman players, and we're totally ignoring institutions that produce math whizzes. Although we're not totally ignorant. I mean, we know what MIT is, and we know why it's a great thing.
Right. I was thinking that too, that, you do know but again, even there, if you said to someone, oh, like, what are some of the papers that have been published by MIT people, or what are some of the, nobody would know.
We all could appreciate a great forward pass, but we don't even understand this paper that got written. I mean, it's not a spectator sport.
Wasn't Krugman associated with MIT? I don't know. But
Was he? Oh dear God!
I think that's where. I don't think he taught there. I believe that's where he got his PhD. I could be off by that, but I think that's where. There you go.
Contra MIT.
All right, I think I'm out of material.
All right, I am spent. This one went long, but it is also great. Thank you, Bob Murphy. If you're watching this or listening on the Bob Murphy Show, please visit heymannature.substack.com and also Heyman Nature on YouTube. And if it's vice versa, go check out Bob on the bobmurphyshow.com and also on the Human Action podcast put up by Mises.org. And thank you, Bob. You are genius and funny and awesome as always. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We'll catch you next time.
So long, folks.